yourselves and a little bit about your company.
Start down at that end.
It's a way to throw me under the bus.
Exactly.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chad Wissinger, and I'm the general counsel, the in-house attorney at a company called Nutrimost. We manufacture 40 different supplements and nutritional products, and we specialize in clinical medical weight loss. So one thing that I bring here is a legal perspective on what it is like doing business in the Indian market in what is a highly regulated space in the United States. And I'm looking forward to talking about that with everybody. Thank you.
Good morning, John Westland with the Melting Pot Restaurants. For those of you who are not familiar, the Melting Pot is the world's leader in fondue. Not only do we feature award-winning cheese fondues, but we also do fresh salads. We have what's called entree fondue, which is a very traditional where the meat comes out unprepared and the guests prepare it at the table. And then, of course, you finish it off with some amazing chocolate fondue. The thing about the Melting Pot is we are a premium brand. Not only do we use premium ingredients, including, as I mentioned, our award-winning cheese, but we also offer an incredibly high level of service. We've been doing it for over 40 years. We started in 1975. We're a U.S. brand. 120 stores now. We're in the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and then we have a store in Saudi Arabia, and we're also building in Qatar. And we are definitely looking forward to the opportunity that exists in the Indian market. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Stephanie Sherlock. We have a company called Architects of Skin based in Sydney, Australia. We have a number of clinics, aesthetic and cosmetic clinics, where we provide services like laser hair removal, skin rejuvenation, injectables, hair loss control, and we're looking for clinics here franchising clinics here in India. It's an exciting country and a great opportunity.
I'm Lex Baker, as you can see on the sign. I work for Wall Street English, which is an international leading chain of English language schools for adults. We have over 400 learning centers in 28 countries currently. And I don't wish to insult people by saying, yes, we're here to teach English to Indians, but we are. Obviously, there is a good level of English in the country. At the same time, as India goes more and more global, to distinguish themselves, people need to speak not just good English, but great English. And that's what we do. We offer a blended learning methodology out of our brick and mortar centers, which allows the student to learn very flexibly and gives personalization. Yeah, there is a certain online element combined with face-to-face classes, which is very effective, but allows people to study at their own rhythm, which is then very attractive to a young adult or a student who obviously is looking to improve their English to advance their career and their future. So we're almost more of a lifestyle brand in that sense, because our real motto is changing futures. So we're also looking forward to what that means in the Indian market.
I'll be signing up in his school. My name is Bill Schreiber, and I'm the Vice President of International Development for Little Caesars Pizza. We're a 59-year-old brand, started in Detroit, Michigan, by Mr. Elitch, our founder, who unfortunately passed away this year in February. I've been in this industry for way many years than many know, but 28 plus, and I've been with different brands that have expanded internationally across the world. We currently, by the end of the year, will be in 25 countries, and looking forward to India for an opportunity to bring what we believe is the best tasting pizza to the country.
Thank you all very much. So, as we look at India from a global perspective, there's certain things that we know. A large and youthful population, a tech-savvy population, the largest English-speaking population in the world, I believe, but Lex is going to work on that. And unlike China, a kind of economy to which India is often compared, this is a service-based economy. Over 50% of the economy is service-based. All of these are very positive from a franchising standpoint. Perhaps the panel could add to that with any other positive and maybe some of the obstacles that global brands face when they're entering India.
Well, let me start by saying, unlike the other panelists who have companies now that are currently in a lot of different countries, although we have 130 highly successful franchise locations in the United States, this is our first international expansion. Yesterday was officially our launch in India of our brand. And unlike a lot of the other countries, or the folks sitting on the panel up here that are in other countries, we spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out where we wanted to start. And for a lot of very positive reasons, our chairman moderator mentioned several of them, India makes perfect sense for us. The political climate in India is stable. It's very welcoming to international brands. From a regulatory perspective, you all have a very friendly model as far as I'm concerned. In the United States, where we manufacture supplements and we're in the medical weight loss clinical space and we franchise, all three of those are incredibly heavily regulated. And when we look around the world and see who's growing, where the per capita income is increasing, and I look at China versus India, for me, India makes a whole lot more sense. I don't have the same language barriers here. I don't have the same regulatory barriers here, but I have all the benefits. I have English speakers, I have growing income, I have growing population, and I have growing awareness of what obesity does to long-term health. So for us, this is an incredible opportunity from a regulatory perspective, from a political perspective. It's a great place to be. So thank you very much for having us, and I would encourage those of you that are in the business community involved politically, please keep that up. That gives us an incredible opportunity to come do business with you, and we look forward to it.
I think the other thing, Martin had mentioned literacy rate in India. So being in a brand that has fondue, which in parts of the world that we've already encountered, it has been a challenge sometimes to teach the community about it, and there's a learning curve. And to be honest, one of the reasons that we're here at this event is not only to find those just right partners, but it is also a fact-finding mission for us. Because as brands, you have to determine maybe there are places in this world that perhaps your brand just will not translate well. And so I was overjoyed yesterday, to be honest, when I was at the booth and people would come by, and when you would mention fondue, there was a grand awareness of it, and more importantly, an acceptance of it. So I think that is a big key, as well as, again, just the literacy of being able to speak the same language. So we do talk a little bit more about fondue for us specifically. There is that awareness. I think the other thing that is attractive to us for this market is that operating as a premium brand, even though fine dining in this country is only about 3% of the F&B, when you look at I think the numbers I've seen are 31 billion or some astronomical number of F&B, even 3% of that is a grand number. There's also not, for us, a lot of competition operating in the premium market as far as chains, especially chains from outside of India. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there. We know that there's going to be some challenges, and that's why one of the things we like to do is find our partners and develop kind of a group strategy. So whether it be working with, of course, here we're working with Fran Global, but we also use partners like Coca-Cola. We have a partner in Newmark Grubb in real estate. So the idea is getting everybody together and using all of our knowledge of the market to develop that strategy as we enter the Indian market. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about this morning.
One of the key areas for us, or one of the exciting things for us in India, is a growing female workforce. Because more and more women are joining the workforce, there's an increased pressure to look a certain way and there's an increased pressure on women to start getting cosmetic procedures done. So for us, it's a perfect opportunity to be in a growing market. To your point, Chad, about regulation, it's definitely an advantage not to have the same restrictions on regulation in India as it is in other countries, but for us it also works against us. Regulation is key when you are performing some sort of surgical procedure on clients, and without certain regulations there's a risk of defragmenting a brand by, if you were in a master franchisee arrangement and you weren't able to monitor standards of care, by not having regulations to support that brand, then there are risks of patients being injured, cosmetic results not quite working the way that you would like, products being brought in from other countries that aren't of a standard that you would expect when injecting botulism toxin, for example, into patient skin. So there are all sorts of issues associated with not having enough regulation. But we can navigate that, I'm sure.
Great point, Stephanie. Thank you.
I would pick up on the same point, actually. Coming from the education industry, we're used to extreme levels of regulation in markets, and it actually being quite difficult to enter. In some ways, that's good in India, because we understand it's pretty easy to get into the education market. Unfortunately, that means almost anyone is allowed to open a school. We teach adults, so it is easier than if you're entering kids' education. But nonetheless, what it means is here we've got a very fragmented market, partially with very questionable quality. We see that as an opportunity. And I do expect, though, and I hope that regulation in future will actually increase, because ultimately, if people are entrusting us with their money and their futures, we need to be delivering results. What we see as the opportunity for us is obviously that means we know from our 400 centers, from our 40 years history, we know how to teach people. We have a method that is attractive to young professionals and students, and we do it well. We actually deliver results. So we hope that allows us to enter and profile ourselves much quicker than a lot of the fragmented competition. The other thing I just wanted to say about the market in general, yes, it could be the largest English-speaking nation. That doesn't mean that there isn't a market for us. The market may not be as big as, for example, in China, where we already have 60,000 students and 73 centers, because people are already speaking English here. But we see that also in Indonesia. We see that in Malaysia, where we have centers. Ultimately, English is the language of globalization, and English is the language of international trade. It is the language of diplomacy. And if you want to get ahead, you don't just have to speak English, you have to speak really good English. You have to be able to read between the lines. You have to be able to negotiate strongly with your partners or present yourself well. And that's essentially what we deliver, as I said before, with that flexible concept. So it's not a massive market, because we're also occupying a premium segment, but it's a very exciting market because we do have an expanding customer base here, and we have incredible internationalization and globalization of the market. So that's where we see the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, after an exhaustive amount of research that our company performed, we found India to be a fantastic market for the opportunity to bring our brand. The country is very unique in terms of people see 1.2 billion people, but more importantly, they see just one name for the country, India. And what you find out when you do your research and you do your look and you begin to truly understand the nuances of the country, that India could easily be looked at 6 countries within one country. So South is uniquely different from North versus East versus West versus major city populations versus a society that is still agriculturally based. So what we found is, and it was brought up in the earlier session today, that there's really 12 major metropolitan areas that offer a unique opportunity for all of us to do an incredible amount of great business. But more importantly is offer something to the Indian consumer that allows them to experience all the years in learning, but more importantly, the standardization, the customization of our products, in our particular case, pizza, that will allow them to experience a really wonderful experience in terms, in our case, the food industry, right, in the QSR segment. But it's uniquely different for everybody, of course, across the board. But that's what we found about India. English speaking is absolutely a big advantage for us. All our materials are in English, everything's done in English. But that's the important part that we saw through India, is an incredible amount of opportunity and that people want a great experience from a great restaurant company.
Thank you all very much. Interesting to see both sides of the regulation piece there. So I'm now going to ask each one of our panelists a question about a different aspect of their view on entering the Indian market from a global perspective. And once we've done that, we'll throw the floor open to questions. So starting with you, Bill, you addressed this briefly, but this is a very large country. And I think growth has to be phased in this country. From your perspective, do you have a plan for that? Do you want to come in geographically in a certain way? Just talk about that for a minute, please.
Well, yeah, so from a geographical standpoint, the first thing we had to do was understand there are natural boundaries in the country, and there's natural definition of what makes up certain parts of the country. And there's different perspectives, by the way, for if you live in the south, i.e. Bangalore, versus as to whether you're from Punjab. And so what we did is took a stab at identifying what we call 5 to 6 territories within the country that made sense from geographical supply chain ability, but also from population centers that are really built into these, each one of these economic zones or major metropolitan areas. So for us, we looked at the north first because, one, we found that pizza is heavily consumed and accepted in this part of the country. More importantly is people may see 1.2 billion, but you need to dive a lot deeper in terms of the market, because you have to understand what is the true economic factors that affect each particular territory, but more importantly is the people that can actually purchase your product, right? It's not 1.2 billion, by the way. It's very different for each one of our particular brands. So we looked at it from that standpoint and then took the understanding that this is where we felt the best proof of concept could be accomplished. And so for us, it's Delhi and NCR, is this particular region, UP, Haryana, and Punjab. And that will allow us to really understand the consumer from a northern perspective, understanding that as we go into different territories across the country, our brand is going to have to modify.
Yeah, I would only echo the same thing. In our business, we tend to start with something that is proof of concept, which Gaurav was talking about this morning. We are in 28 markets, so obviously we do have experience in launching in different places and different cultures. The advantage in the end of what we do is the language is the language, and people are people. Although obviously there are cultural differences, ultimately we're teaching the same thing. And acquisition of a language is not so culturally specific. So in many ways, a lot of what we do can be transferred. However, we do ultimately need, I believe the power of your brand is really dependent on the power of your master franchisee in each country, unless you have a huge global name like a Starbucks. We don't have that kind of coverage. So it's a very local brand, even if we have a global name, and we need a very reliable partner to demonstrate and learn how this specific market works, in particular in terms of its traffic. So we tend to head for the major hubs, the major populated hubs, which for us would be Delhi, Mumbai to begin with. Learn about the business. That's where we have the biggest concentration, obviously, of potential clients. Make sure that we establish 2 or 3 successful centers, and then we can start to grow and explore other regions. But obviously the advantage of franchising is we need that local expertise. So we're bringing the global knowledge and know-how of operating in different markets, but none of us have actually run the business here.
Yeah, that's a great point. And ultimately, in any franchise deal or situation, the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, be it master, area developer, or single unit, is the absolute most important thing. There has to be trust on both sides. Is there any franchisees in the audience today? No? Excellent. Which brand, sir? Didn't hear. Ah, any franchisors? We'll get your perspective later. All right, moving down the line, Stephanie. Explain. You're looking here to develop on a master franchise basis. Why does that make sense, both from your perspective and from the franchisee's perspective?
I'll be brief. There's a lot of answers to this question. But from a franchisor's perspective, I think the key advantage is expansion and geography. The master franchisee has a better understanding of the geography, that exclusive territory, than I do, or any other international brand. When you bring your brand to a new country that you know very little about, it's key that the master franchisee understands that exclusive territory. So the location of the clinics, for example, in our case, a clinic's not going to work if it's popped up in the wrong location, and the master franchisee has local knowledge. From an expansion perspective, using a master franchisee arrangement, you're able to grow at a much faster rate than just on a franchisee level. So for a franchisor, I think geography and the rate of expansion is probably key. I think the key advantage for a master franchisee is cash flow. They earn a percentage of the royalties. It may be anywhere from 45 to 70% for every additional franchise that they sell. They also make a percentage on the franchise fee. So if you add up the number of additional franchises that the master franchisee is able to sell, they end up generating a significant amount of cash flow and sitting on a beach in Seychelles, I'd imagine, sometime much later on.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So on that subject, John, could you just talk for a minute about the rights, the responsibilities of both parties, franchisor and franchisee, and if that is the same system-wide, if there's any variation to that in India? I suspect not. I suspect it's a value of your company, but talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the franchisor, they have a couple responsibilities. I think number one is to be honest with themselves as they start looking at global expansion. Do they have the appetite for it? There's a significant investment that needs to go on. Bill had talked about it. The research, that needs to happen. And oftentimes companies, they said, oh, we've got a great product, let's just go international. And they just don't understand what really it entails. They also have a responsibility to accept that there is going to need to be some adaptation to the brand. And sometimes brands are not willing to do that, but they need to go through the procedure of figuring out what is their true DNA, what are the things that just cannot change, and what are the things that they are willing to change. And if that's the case, then they can go global. As far as rights, as a franchisor, we do have the right though to make sure to protect the brand and put systems in place to do that when you go out there. As far as the franchisees go, I think the biggest responsibility a potential franchisee has is to make sure that the brand they are choosing is the one that they have a passion for. Not just the one that will necessarily bring them the most profit, while that is important. What we have found, and I'm sure everybody up here will agree, profits go a certain distance. But after that point, if you're not passionate, if you don't have a love for what you're doing, at some point, you just won't be engaged in your business. And with the rapid rate that the industry is going, franchising industry or just the business world in general, if you're not engaged in your business, at some point somebody else will be, and they're going to take the business from you. So I think there's that responsibility to make sure that this is a brand that fits with your passion and your love, not just today, but in the years to come.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. It's about having a passion for the brand.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely. That'd be great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in.
Go ahead.
A couple of people made the point today about training as well. So I would like to reiterate that because I think it's essential. Gaurav was saying it's not a transaction. We view our franchisees very much as partners. You know, we will only succeed if they succeed. And it's not enough just to define a bunch of processes on paper, although that is an important part of franchising. It is crucial to get the right people who have that passion, but then make sure they actually share and understand your passion to run the business the way that you want it to be run. And you can't just assume that they will get that from paper. So as a franchisor, our obligation, I feel, to answer your question, is very much, as well as documenting all of the processes, as well as making sure that the product or service delivery is consistent and high quality, we have to engage and we have to train up not just the initial people, but the full team, at least of the pilot center or the pilot project, to make sure that exactly what we believe our brand should represent is actually happening right here. And certainly in our business, although we do have a very established concept, people in education are crucial. So getting that right team set up, getting the right philosophy in the initial master franchise is absolutely crucial.
Great point. Training is a vital part of the whole process. A question for the panel. As far as localization for the Indian market, obviously if one's bringing in, if one is acquiring a franchise as a master franchisee or as a unit franchisee, one buys the system. But I think franchisors have to recognize, well, the brand wants to enter intact. Culturally, there are often tweaks to the local market, maybe in marketing, maybe in the menu. And I'd like to just hear from the panelists if they're open to that when they're entering the new market. Chad.
It's actually an extremely valid point for our brand, because one of the tools that we offer franchisees, is a proprietary software that our founder, who's been a nutritional scientist for the past 4 decades, has spent developing the science behind the nutritional components of tens of thousands of foods and the interaction that those particular foods have with particular medical conditions. So our programs are tailored, if diabetes runs in your family, to target you away from foods that tend to harm that condition and push you to foods that create that condition. But because of the enormous amount of money that we spent developing the software, we have built into it the ability to convert it culturally into half dozen different places. India is the largest one of those. So we have the software built, already primed to be able to do that. But what we need are people here, a good partner here, to help us understand how we can further translate that. Stephanie's point is very well taken about protecting the brand. I personally would rather the company be able to be in charge of its brand protection than a series of complex regulations from the federal government. But I understand the point, because, for example, in the US, my most successful franchisee owns 9 locations now. He lost 140 pounds on the program and credits it with saving his life. It is not surprising to me that he is a master salesman of our product, our supplements, and our brand. We strongly recommend franchisees in the US, as they get a couple of tremendous clients through their store, to consider hiring them as healthcare coaches, because somebody whose life you've affected will be the best person on the planet to close a sale. I realize I have a little bit of a different model than restaurants, but customer service still reigns supreme, because at the end of the day, that person's willingness to pay you for the service turns on the corporate representative that they're interfacing with. That's absolutely critical for us here.
And I'll add in from a restaurant perspective, I think it's uniquely different because I don't know how much you can modify, surgery, right? It has to be a certain process and system, and it goes, right? Okay, great. For us, it is imperative that we understand that, again, what works in our particular home country, the United States, doesn't necessarily mean it works here. There are fundamental foundations for us, but more importantly, what we do is the research to understand what the local products are and what consumers demand here from our brand. So pizzas are pizzas, but what goes on top of them will look uniquely different.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll actually tell a funny story. Like most brands, when you first go international, you're very beholden to, as I mentioned, this DNA of your brand and really understanding what that is. And a colleague of mine, we joke in our early days how much time we spent looking for an 8.5-inch long black paper wrapped straw, because we felt that that's who we are. We have them in all of our other 100+ restaurants. We have to have a black paper wrapped straw. And it was at some point, I'm sure talking with other colleagues, that they kind of taught us that, those are the things you have to be able to bend on. And what that did for us is that we've really designed our menu. We always say we're kind of a blend of traditional and modern fondue with global and local flavors. And so what we've realized is that the DNA of us, our brand, is the fondue, but certainly allowing those local ingredients, local transformations is what then makes the brand relevant to the market. But there is definitely a learning curve I think that brands have to go through to get to that point. Luckily, more and more U.S. brands or international brands are doing it, so there's a lot more sharing that goes on. I think that's one other thing I will say, just in general, is that thing I love about the international franchising is the sharing that goes on. Sitting up at the table with colleagues, while even at times we may be competitors, we all understand at the end of the day, the franchising industry is the industry that is going to build economies throughout the world, and anything that we can all do to help that makes us all stronger.
I just wanted to add, Bill, he's right. You don't modify a hernia repair in India versus a hernia repair in Australia. However, being in the skin industry, we do have to modify our equipment. In Australia, we have a very large white skin population. So lasers, for example, are very, very powerful. If you use a powerful laser on somebody with dark skin, and Indian skin is dark skin, there's a range of colours in Indian skin, but there are some very dark skins, and you use the same laser that you'd use on somebody with white skin, you would burn them. So we actually have to modify our equipment quite dramatically. And in skin health, that's just one example.
That's great, and it's also great that the franchisors on the panel have expressed these opinions and are aware of the changes that you may need to see a brand tweaked slightly as it comes into the market. I think, unless there's anything to add from the panel here, we've got a widely experienced global panel. We've got an international attorney on the panel. Please, does anybody have any questions? And also, the gentleman that was the franchisor at the back there, I couldn't hear the name of your brand. Can somebody give him a microphone?
Hello. Yeah, my brand name is Coldwell Banker, US. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So, do we have any questions this morning?
Good morning. I'm here, in fact, good morning, and thanks for the panelists. I will be bringing in a global village concept, in fact, a partnership between the two partners, I believe. My question is pointed towards Lex on the education. I come from the education industry. Very interesting concept which you brought in on English to teaching the country like us. I'm borrowing Martin's question, in fact, which the other panelists asked. What is there for the franchisee as you see for the Indian partner which you are looking forward for? What do you expect from the franchisee, and what is there as a win-win model between in the education segment in English itself. And I believe if you want to touch upon, I believe we can take it offline also. You talked about English and culture. India today, I believe, as an English-speaking country, is talking to the global village as we talk about. And we need to bring in the dialects and the accent of different cultures as we talk English, actually. So I believe you touched upon 29. So if you want to touch upon, it's fine otherwise.
Well, you can come and visit me in the Fran Global booth.
We'll do that.
afterwards.
We'll do that.
In brief, yeah, exactly. The way that we see it is we already bring a very established and successful and efficacious product and service. So we know that people will learn English with our program. We also have a very efficient operating model, which generally translates across different countries. But to touch on the point about different cultures and customization, basically our core offering doesn't normally need to change, at least across the 28 countries we currently have. But what we have around the edge are supplementary offerings that cater for the specific needs of the client. So to echo what everybody here says, I mean, ultimately, if your consumer is not satisfied, you will not have a business. So when we talk about franchise or franchisee relationship, what we especially are looking for is, obviously, we have the educational expertise. We don't necessarily need an educator to be a franchisee, but what we do need is somebody who is completely plugged in to the culture and the market and the legislation and the regulation, so that we really understand how to get the business off the ground. And for that reason, we do have some cases in our markets of non-nationals opening a new country. They tend to take longer. So if you actually work with somebody who is really involved in the business here, that accelerates your development as well. And so in many ways, what we bring is the knowledge and the concept, and the franchisee needs to deliver the local knowledge. In particular, in our case, it's tapping also into the client. So what are the client's needs and how do we address them? How do we reach the clients and how do we then bring them in to show them what we do? And that's what we really need.
I think there's one back there too. Could we get a microphone, please? Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. So I was a little bit interested. My name is Anumeha, and I would like to ask a question from Stephanie. India may not be a highly regulated market right now as far as your product is concerned, but what we understand that you must be having some standard operating procedures. When you talk about master franchising, how do you intend or how do you plan to maintain those standards?
That's a very good question, and it's one of the biggest flashing neon signs for us. Obviously, healthcare is something that you can't play with, and maintaining a certain standard of care is the only way we're going to protect our brand. Because as soon as we have patients or clients who end up with an outcome that's not positive, it's going to reflect quite negatively on our brand. One of the things that we have established is a plethora of board-certified doctors in the US and doctors in Australia that are registered with the Royal Australian College of Surgeons, who are working with us to train master franchisees and franchisees in the full plethora of surgical and non-surgical procedures that we provide. We fly them to the master franchisee and to the franchisees themselves in their clinic, and they spend anywhere from 1 day to 1 week training the doctors that are needed in those clinics, in addition to nurses and anaestheticians. Following that, we have an online training module where videos are uploaded, questionnaires are uploaded, information on techniques, product knowledge are all uploaded onto the platform. And it's expected that every member of staff sits an exam at the end of the month after utilising and studying those manuals. We are able to see the results that come through the system, and we can identify then gaps in knowledge. We also have employed those doctors to return on a regular basis to make sure and observe that those treatments are being done to the standard that we would expect. Those doctors travel regularly internationally. They attend conferences. They are speakers, and they understand the latest trends and techniques in the sorts of procedures that we're offering.
Super. Thank you very much, Stephanie. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we have to wrap this up. Was there one in the back there?
Hello. Yeah, here again. I wanted to ask a panel that the awareness of the international brands in the Indian market or the Indian consumers is very less. As I own a franchise of Coldwell Banker LLC, people in India don't know what is Coldwell Banker, or even if you take any other brand from internationally, so people don't know what is it exactly. So what efforts need a franchisor or a franchisee to take, should he take to create awareness in the Indian consumer?
Who would like to take that?
I think one of the biggest things is developing that partnership between the franchisee and the franchisor to find ways to go out, especially as a brand is being developed, and teach the consumer. So an example, from our brand is our opening in Canada. Before we opened the brand, we went out into the marketplace. We actually have a kind of a fondue cart, and we took it out and we went to bridal shows and food shows and different venues. And we also were able to capture people's contact information. So by the time that we got to the opening, that market was extremely aware of our brand. They were extremely aware of what we did. And then when we announced the opening of that restaurant, there was actually a 2-month waiting list to get a reservation for the brand. And now, of course, that's obviously, in restaurants, but I think any brand that you have, that's what you need to do, is find that relationship, work together, and let the market know. Find opportunities, use social media, anything you can to teach. So when the brand does launch, there's already that market awareness before you even open your doors.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're out of time here. First of all, thank you all very much for attending, and thank you very much to my panel of experts here for your input. We're pleased to be in India, and if you need to see any of us, we'll all be in the exhibit hall today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to request our panel members to please remain on the stage. I'm going to request our session lead and moderator, Mr. Martin, to please present the token of gratitude as well as the mementos to all our speakers as well.